Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine War News Update video for the, 28th of May 2023. Let's go straight to where we usually start. The Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, always indicatively useful, I find. Even if the top line figures aren't necessarily 100% accurate, it gives you it's a reflection of what took place the day before. 400 liquidated personnel there, that is dropping down again, and we aren't really seeing too much activity on the front lines in terms of ground forces interacting with each other. So that's kind of understandable. 3 tanks, 7 APCs, what we've broadly seen over the last week or so. There have been some really big upticks in APCs on certain days, but that's sort of dropped down. Still, losing 7 a day is not great for the Russians. 11 artillery systems. Now, this is the lowest number we have seen in, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks. They have lost phenomenal amounts this month. In fact, commentator Thierry Schmidlin has totted up what has been lost just this month. This doesn't include last night's figures or yesterday's figures, just some monthly statistics for the month of May since the 1st of May. We have 15,240 liquidated personnel, 99 tanks, 250 APVs, 485 pieces of artillery, 28 MLRS, 34 anti-aircraft systems, 2 airplanes, 2 helicopters, 327 vehicles and fuel tanks, 90 pieces of special equipment. And artillery, anti-aircraft systems, and special equipment are the largest monthly numbers. So that is quite incredible. And and the month of May wasn't even done at the point of totting up these figures. So you can see that artillery, anti-aircraft systems, and special equipment are explicit targets for Ukrainians. In fact, someone was saying on the threads yesterday that there are drone companies who just their jobs are to go and spot artillery systems ahead of, one would assume, the counteroffensive, but also useful anyway. We'll get onto some of that footage. I just want to talk about what happened last night. Last night was the biggest single Shahed drone attack. There were 52 out of 54 Iranian-made Shahed drones taken out last night. That's really good interception rates, by the way. Largest attack of its sort yet. Over 40 of these were downed above Kyiv. 1 person was killed. Russia once again changed its tactics of drone attacks against Ukraine. So now they appear to be, well, it seems that they are trying to find where the Ukrainian air defense systems are. It's a kind of indication these arguably are almost sacrificial drones. This is just an interesting picture. Ukrainian soldiers of the 208th Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade standing in front of an air defense complex with an overview of all the targets it has downed. 22 cruise missiles, 7 fighter jets, 9 helicopters, 15 drones of various types can be counted. I'd love to know where this air defense system is situated, because that is, that's a good haul of equipment they have taken down. Okay, so last night, one of these, some footage, there's quite a bit of footage of drones being taken out in places. Here's one, I believe, somewhere over Kyiv. And the claim here is that it's possibly an IRIS-T missile taking out that drone. That looks to be that's the missile, not the drone that you saw moving there, and then it hits the drone. But as you know, what goes up must come down, and when a drone is hit by a quite substantial air defense missile, that fiery ball of munition must come down, and therefore there are fires that get started. So Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, according to updated information, a roof of a 3-story warehouse building is on fire in one of the districts of Kyiv as a result of the fall of drone debris. And updated information says that fire is currently being contained in that district over the area of 700 square meters. The destruction of building structures is on the total area of 1,000 square meters. So that's huge. So yeah, the drone was taken down, brilliant. But actually, you could argue that in this case, more damage was caused than had the drone hit its target. I don't know, but yeah, a bit of an issue. So there is lots of footage of Russian artillery getting taken out to kind of feed into those figures, really high figures of Russian artillery losses. I was challenged by a Russian the other day as like, well, yeah, you say that these figures are taking, that this artillery, Russian artillery is getting taken out in huge numbers. Sorry, my words aren't very good today. And what's the evidence for this? Well, there is plenty of evidence. Oryx is counting up the evidence, and that's pretty high on a daily basis. Or actually, they do it every 2 days. But then also, there's just so much footage coming out. I mean, that's just one howitzer. You've got FPV drone taking out multiple launch rocket system here, BM-21, and these FPV drones are doing a huge amount of damage in and around Ukraine. And then there's a montage. 15th separate artillery reconnaissance brigade destroyed various Russian artillery pieces. It's an extra confirmation of those high numbers of destroyed artillery pieces in the daily reports of the Ukrainian General Staff. So there is the evidence is out there. Whether you've got evidence of every single piece getting taken out, well, no, of course you won't have that. That's highly unlikely. But there is a lot of evidence of a lot of kit. Here's a best part of a minute montage of different pieces of artillery getting taken out. So there you go. I could sit and show you all of that, but you get the idea that there is at least some justification of those figures. Okay, Russia's occupiers claim that HIMARS hit the town of Volnovakha. I talked to you about how there are so many places around the south that are getting hammered. It's not just the south, actually, in Donetsk has been hit. Reporting from Ukraine, the pro-Ukrainian YouTube channel has done another video last night on all the various hits, and storm shadows are being used to hit further down south towards the coast, in the kind of Zaporizhia and Donetsk, southern Donetsk oblasts. Let's get a map and just give you a quick look at that. So the claims are that there are just huge amounts of storm shadow hits on Mariupol, Berdyansk, Melitopol. Then you get Volnovakha, we just heard last night, that's going to be HIMARS. You've got Polohy, you've got Tokmak, you've got Bilmak, you've got Vasilivka. I've probably got some of those places a little bit off there. I can't tell on this map. And then areas in Donetsk being hit behind the lines, HIMARS being active here, and storm shadows along the edges. But then they've been throwing drones up towards Moscow, as well as in Belgorod and across the border in this kind of area of Russia, as well as Krasnodar. So they are throwing all sorts around the Ukrainians, around Russia, as well as around the occupied territories of Ukraine, and don't forget Crimea too. And this is signifying a real uptick in activity that shows that, hey, there's going to be a counteroffensive at some point pretty soon. Russian media reports that Ukrainian drones attacked the Ilyinsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai. That's not for the first time either. Authorities claim that all the drones were shot down. You got Russia on fire here. This is about 300 kilometers north of Moscow. Big fire. So it's not necessarily going to be anything to do with the Ukrainians, but it does indicate issues for the Russians still. And then just before we go on to sort of odds and sods and military stuff, this is, again, I don't really know what's going on with the Ivan Kurs. Claims that it's back in Sevastopol, and here you've got a crew member talking about how they shot down the drones. Nothing but smooth sailing, according to this pro-Russian source, on Russian reconnaissance ship Ivan Kurs. A sailor explains how craft took out 3 Ukrainian kamikaze boat drones in quick succession, manning guns and leaving remains of Kiev boats at the bottom of the Black Sea. That's a claim coming out yesterday, but you do have counterclaims. Robert Ezagalis on my threads yesterday said, as to the Ivan Kurs story, the Pravda has put forward a video that they say they got from the MOD. It shows something interesting in how the ship moves, lurching rather suddenly in relation to the water immediately after the moment of the alleged impact. So that was part of the footage I showed you, I think. That usually indicates a direct hit or a large explosion very close to the vessel. Furthermore, some sources now say that the ship is not evident at its two berths. Added to that, the commander, which is the marine tow truck, the kind of a vessel that's out there, is no longer providing updates as to its position, course, and speed. As far as we know, it's still towing something. And then you get, information like this. I remain in the view that the Russian reporting on the Ivan Kurz is a cover-up story. The recovery vessel, the commander, remains near the approximate site of the drone ship attack and is not making for Sevastopol. The longer it stays in the area, the more likely it's guarding the wreck. A sunken spy ship would also be irresistible treasure. Interesting coincidence that the Ivan Kurz incident occurred not far from the area that our Reaper drone was forced down. Perhaps it gives us a pretext to take a look in the area, just looking for our drone. And you wonder whether the commander or the Ivan Kurz were indeed had something to do with that drone, that sunken Reaper drone. Anyway, I'm professing agnosticism here. Like, I don't really know what's happened, other than there are claims from both sides that seem pretty legitimate. And I guess we'll have to wait and see. Although, there is this growing amount of footage of the Ivan Kurz in Sevastopol. So is there an involvement with the sister ship, or is it I mean, the most plausible explanation from the Russian point of view is that drone footage of the drone that went right up to the ship just didn't explode. It just kind of bounced off the ship, caused absolutely no damage at all. And that somehow that long distance footage of the Ivan Kurz and the drone exploding that my commenter there was talking about was somehow doctored or didn't happen. And then the boat just returned to port, and all the other bits of information are just somehow false. I don't know. I find that it's possible, but not probable. But then, what explains the fact that there seems to be, or what explains the claim that there seems to be, the Ivan Kurz in Sevastopol unhurt? So I don't know. I just don't know. Anyway, on to odds and sods and a little military news. Scott Ritter is still doing his book tour in Russia. If anyone gives Scott Ritter the time of day as far as credibility is concerned, they need to get their head checked. Does Ritter really believe the lies he espouses in his press conference? It's clear why the Russians would promote him, but what is Ritter's endgame? Is it because Putin will look past the sex offender convictions and Ritter sees his future in Russia? So Scott Ritter continues his Russian tour. In Crimea, he profusely praised Putin as, quote, the greatest leader of all time. In what sense can you evaluate Vladimir Putin as being the greatest leader in human history of all time? It's abject nonsense. And said he wants to ask whether Putin would find it in his heart to forgive America for all it's done to destroy the thriving Russia. Mate, jog on. Go and get your Russian citizenship and stay there. Just anyone that comes to my channel here and says, "Oh, I think you need to deal with what Scott Ritter says," can honestly take a long walk off a short plank, off a short pier, because quite frankly, he is not worthy of my time. Anyway, Russia-Ukraine war live. We have enormous resources and haven't started yet to act very seriously, says the Kremlin ambassador to the UK. Russia hasn't started to act seriously yet in Ukraine. When Laura Kunsberg mentions war crimes, including a maternity hospital being attacked in Mariupol, and asks why Kellen won't be honest about what has happened, he replies that the war has been going on since 2014 in the Donbass, with crimes being committed on the Ukrainian army side. He adds, "We want peace. We want no threat from Ukraine to Russia. This is one thing. And second, that Russians in Ukraine will be treated like all other nations in the world, like a French person in Ukraine. It is a big idealistic mistake to think that Ukraine will prevail. Russia is 16 times bigger than Ukraine. We have enormous resources, and we haven't just started yet to act very seriously. We are just defending the lands which are under control, and and assisting Russian people over there, we are rebuilding the Donbass. It depends on the escalation of the war that is taking place. Sooner or later, this escalation might have a new dimension that we do not need and we do not want. We can make peace tomorrow if Ukrainian side will be prepared to negotiate, but there is no preconditions for that. The German defense minister said if we stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, it will stop the day after tomorrow. And he said, and laughs, saying he is right. If supplies of weapons will be stopped, it will be stopped the day after tomorrow. Please stop it. Well, do you know what? Russia needs to stop it. Russia needs to, you can't invade a country and then say, stop defending yourself. If you stop defending yourself, we'll have peace tomorrow. And all the land that we've just taken after our invasion. It's just, you shouldn't take any of those kind of claims seriously. And anyone in my threads that advocates this kind of position is just a Putin bot and a Putin appeaser. And you are on the wrong side of political history and morality. I'm sorry, I have to say that. Right, the intensity is increasing. Ukraine says first steps in the counteroffensive have begun. Presidential advisor says supply lines and depots already being destroyed as preliminary operations get underway. And this talks to the idea of all of those areas around Ukraine, occupied territories of Ukraine being hit, and areas within Russia. This is very much a stage of shaping operations that are looking to hinder Russia's defensive abilities there. Okay, moving on to military aid, and there really isn't much to report today. The main one is Austria allocating 2 million euros for equipment for demining for Ukraine. So they are a neutral country and they won't provide military gear for Ukraine. But as I've said before, if that's the case with these countries, then it's about specialization. You know, you guys are in charge of supplying demining and humanitarian aid and all that stuff. If you're not going to provide military equipment, that's fair enough. It means that we don't have to do that. So countries like UK and France can say, right, we don't need to consider demining at all. That's not our bag. We're talking about stuff over here, military equipment, right? Switzerland and Austria, you deal with all of that other stuff. And actually, you get to the same point. It doesn't matter that these guys don't provide military weapons because that's going to be the job of someone else. They just have to do slightly more of that and less of the humanitarian stuff. You guys do more humanitarian stuff and less of the military stuff. So that's my opinion. Right. Denmark creates $133 million fund to invest in Ukraine. It's launched a new program to aid Ukraine, an investment fund with 1 billion Danish kroner, $133 million. Ukraine's economy ministry announced on May the 27th. Okay, and now moving on to geopolitical stuff. So it's sort of a quiet day for news. Let's see what Lindsey Graham says. And this is interesting. He's a Republican in America, a Republican politician who is actually very much on the side of Ukraine and has said so on a number of occasions. Here, I'm not usually a big fan of Lindsey Graham, so it's great to hear him say stuff like this.
Free or die.
Free or die.
Now you are free,
Yes.
and we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
It's the best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
No, it's
Free or die.
And he'll probably get called out for that by the Russians big time. Best money we've ever spent is in Russians dying. But you get what he's trying to say is from a geopolitical strategic point of view, this is a really good investment. I mean, you've got the Ukrainians fighting the war that the Americans were always fearing fighting, but were gearing up to fight during the whole Cold War. And they had a couple of instances here and there, like sort of proxy wars in other places. But this is the biggest opportunity for the US to effectively win the Cold War, if you like, an extended version of it, or Cold War 2.0. And Lindsey Graham's right. This is like really good money from that point of view. Yes. Anyway. Not able to verify these figures, but this is perfectly likely and shows how much damage companies do when they still trade in Russia, says Tim White. There's zero argument financially or morally for staying in a terrorist state. Literally blood on the hands. So it turns out that a company that makes Oreo, Halls, Toblerone has paid $61 million in taxes to the Russian government last year, thus helping fund Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine. They continue to do business and pay taxes. So boycott Mondelez. And this is something I've been thinking of. I think they own Cadbury's as well. They do. So I think they've possibly half like brought themselves out of Russia or something. They've done something towards lessening their involvement in Russia, but it is evidently not enough. So that for me is a pretty easy boycott. I'm going to have to look into that and throw your opinions around on the socials like Twitter, Facebook. If you disagree with what these guys are doing, let them know about it. Public outcry is one of the best ways to get them to change their positioning. Right, Greece supports Hungary in blocking new European sanctions against Russia, Politico has written. Hungary and Greece are not happy with the list of private companies Ukraine calls war sponsors, which includes a number of European ones. There are some fairly close connections to Greece with Russia. Cyprus is indeed a place that has close connections with Russia. A lot of money, Russian money in Cyprus. And you get some of the shadow fleets of these boats who transfer Russian oil to non-Russian entities are registered in Cyprus. I think Cyprus has a lot to do with that. So there are these close connections between Greece and Russia, and obviously Hungary and Russia as well. So it looks like you could have two rather difficult European players there. Polls are opening in Turkey's presidential runoff between Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu. I've evidently butchered that. This is important because it might determine Turkey's positioning for vis-a-vis Russia, but actually it's pretty much a shoo-in that Erdogan's going to win. I would have thought he was a good, almost 5 points ahead of the opponent in the initial election, and then the top two went for a runoff, which is taking place now, but the third placed candidate who polled at about 5%, I think most of those votes would go to Erdogan. So I think Erdogan, he was very close to 50% anyway in that initial poll. So I think he's going to be, as it says here, Erdogan is leading with a big margin in multiple polls, but it might all depend on who goes to the polling station. So yeah, mobilization of voters. I don't know what it's like in Turkey with regard to if more people vote, what way that goes. So for example, in the US, the more people that vote, the better it benefits Democrats. So that's why there's always a lot of talk about voter suppression, all that, because the GOP know that the fewer people that vote in the US, the more it benefits the GOP. And actually, it's the same in the UK, I think. So the more people who vote in the UK, the more likely it is that non-conservative governments or parties benefit. So it's about voter mobilization often with regard to how elections turn out. It's just about getting people to the polls. There's a lot of apathetic voters who would actually side with certain parties more than other parties, and it's trying to mobilize them to get that kind of political representation. So, but I don't know what it is with regard to how that pans out with regard to Turkish voting. And then the last thing is Lukashenko, the effectively Belarusian dictator. He's become very ill. For the second time in the last few weeks, the opposition, Belarusian opposition and Ukrainian officials are claiming that President Lukashenko has fallen gravely ill and is on his deathbed at a hospital in the Russian capital of Moscow after an important meeting between him and President Vladimir Putin. However, so far there's no evidence of any of these rumors, but Valery Tsepkalo says here, according to preliminary information subject to further confirmation, he was urgently transported to Moscow's Central Clinical Hospital after a closed-door meeting with Putin. Currently, he remains under medical care. Their leading specialists have been mobilized to address his critical condition. Blood purification procedures have been conducted, and Lukashenko's condition has been deemed non-transportable. The orchestrated efforts to save The Belarusian dictator aimed to dispel speculations regarding Kremlin's alleged involvement in his poisoning. But and so on and so forth. It did seem that he did have previous health issues, and it's not a poisoning. That's what I last sort of reported on. But there are still all these memes about Russia finding out that they need to order in more polonium and stuff. So I don't know what's going to go on there, but that could have really far-reaching implications. It depends whether the Kremlin would try to install someone who is pro-Kremlin there. What would happen politically around Belarus? That might have huge implications for what takes place in Ukraine. Anyway, that's the news from me. Please like, subscribe, and share. As you can see, with only 25 minutes gone, that's a good 10 minutes plus less news than I normally produce, because just less has happened. We're in that moment before the counteroffensive and after the Russian offensive, so things are a little bit calm. The calm before the storm, potentially. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and share. Appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.